the Mouse Tank. That was the nickname given to one of the last, and most extreme, examples of Germany's super-heavy armored vehicles. A tank weighing nearly 200 tons, built at a turning point in World War II, with one goal: to give the Wehrmacht's ground forces an edge over an enemy that outnumbered them. Its front armor was designed to shrug off hits from virtually any anti-tank round of the era, and its main gun packed firepower on par with the most advanced tanks of its time. So why did this machine, one Hitler placed enormous hopes on, never fire a single shot at the enemy? Today, we're going to uncover the truth behind the Third Reich's most ambitious and, at the same time, most disastrous tank project. You'll see how German engineers pulled Hitler into a trap of pure gigantomania, and why this captured monster became a kind of ghost that pushed Soviet designers into a 4-year chase, nearly derailing the tank-building priorities of the eventual victors. We'll also walk you through one interpretation that flips the usual story on its head. What was the mouse actually meant for, and why did anyone still want to produce it, despite the enormous cost and its obvious impracticality on a real battlefield? And before we start this deep dive, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? It really helps us understand where our audience is. Thanks. June 1940. Paris has fallen, and the Third Reich's triumph looks absolute. But while Wehrmacht troops march down the Champs-Élysées, weapons engineers from the Army Ordnance Office stand frozen on French test ranges. In their hands are captured blueprints, and even prototypes, of French super-heavy tanks. These aren't just tanks, they're multi-turreted land battleships, with armor that existing guns can barely crack. Next to these steel giants, Germany's main vehicles, the light Panzer IIs and the medium Panzer IIIs, suddenly look like supporting cast. In Berlin, the warning is obvious. If this war drags on, and the Allies manage to field mobile fortresses like these, Germany's blitzkrieg tactics could slam headfirst into armor that simply won't break. Adolf Hitler takes personal control. As 1941 begins, the engine of German engineering spins up with manic intensity. The Führer doesn't want just a heavy tank. He wants a radical answer to any future threat, a moving citadel that can ignore enemy fire. The rush is fueled by intelligence reports. German leadership is convinced that by the spring of 1943, the Soviet Union will roll out new steel monsters onto the battlefield. Even the heavy tank projects, already on the drawing boards, don't feel bold enough for Hitler. He demands a breakthrough tank with extreme protection, something meant to end any argument the moment it appears. That's how the project that would be given the ironic name Mäuschen, Little Mouse, begins. On March 22, 1942, an unprecedented alliance of industrial giants is formed. Ferdinand Porsche takes overall responsibility for the concept. Daimler-Benz develops the machine's heart, the power plant. Krupp forges the massive hull. Siemens handles the intricate electrical system, and Skoda designs a unique suspension. On paper, a colossus takes shape, 100 to 120 tons, armed with a 149mm gun. The scale is hard to even picture, more than 10 meters long and about 3 meters tall. But when Hitler looks at the sketches, he's unimpressed. He wants more steel and a longer gun barrel, one that can destroy targets at ranges the enemy can't reach. Each new demand from the Führer turns into an engineering nightmare. The gun grows to nearly 10 meters in length. The armor gets thicker and thicker, and the weight climbs with it. On the drafting tables, the little mouse begins to swell in a way that's almost frightening. 130 tons, 150, then 170. And the designers run into the central problem. How do you make a mountain of metal move? A traditional transmission won't survive the load. So they make a bold choice, a hybrid drive system. A huge aircraft engine spins a generator, which feeds electricity to motors that drive the tracks. All of 1942 turns into a cycle of constant revisions. The turret is redesigned twice, the arrangement of the two guns is changed, and the team agonizes over which power system can even work. By the time the concept becomes something real, the world is looking at a machine beyond common sense. The final weight reaches an absurd 190 tons. This isn't just a weapon, it's practically a geological event. For the 6-man crew to climb inside, they need a special ladder. The front armor, 200 millimeters of rolled homogeneous steel, makes it almost immune to the anti-tank guns of the time. But that protection comes at a price. Speed that barely reaches 20 kilometers per hour on flat ground. And that's the moment whispers start spreading through headquarters. Germany isn't building a tool for victory. It's building the most expensive, most unwieldy monument to its own ambition. Despite the skepticism of some generals, preparations for production move forward at full speed. On May 14, 1943, Hitler is shown a full-scale mock-up. He's thrilled. He sees the Maus as the unbreakable wall that will stop the push from the east. At Heinz Guderian's insistence, the final tweaks are made. Flamethrowers are dropped in favor of machine gun ports in the hull sides, meant to protect the tank from infantry at close range. But another problem is impossible to ignore. No bridge in Europe can carry that kind of weight. The solution sounds like science fiction. The tank is supposed to cross rivers by driving along the bottom, fully sealed, while receiving power for its electric motors through cables from another Maus parked on the bank. In November 1943, the project is formally approved, and the Wehrmacht signs a contract for 120 vehicles. But at the exact moment these steel giants are supposed to start rolling off assembly lines, dark smoke begins to hang over Germany's industrial heart, carried there by British bombers. The Wehrmacht's plans for mass production started collapsing before the first bolt was ever tightened on the factory floor. Guderian, the Inspector General of Armored Troops and a pragmatist to his core, watched in alarm as the project devoured resources. He demanded the madness be stopped. Build just 5 vehicles, test them in real combat conditions, identify the fatal flaws, and only then open the state's wallet. Guderian saw what the Führer refused to acknowledge: fuel consumption that could reach 300 liters per 100 kilometers, and in the mock-up's first version, a complete lack of machine guns to defend against infantry. His arguments with Hitler's inner circle were fierce, but the final word didn't come from the general's opposition. It came from iron rain falling out of the sky. By late 1943, Britain's Royal Air Force had begun systematically turning the Ruhr, the industrial heart of the Reich, into scorched earth. During the Battle of the Ruhr, Krupp's plants in Essen were hit hard. One design office was wiped out, along with unique documentation for the Maus turret and its entire armament package. The project was thrown back by a long 4 months. But the real collapse came in July, when a 50-minute bombing raid destroyed 51 factory buildings. Production of hulls and guns was knocked out completely. On November 5, 1943, serial production of the Maus was officially cancelled, leaving only 2 prototypes on the books. And yet, even in this hopeless situation, Hitler and the SS leadership still clung to a secret concept for how these giants could be used. They understood one thing clearly: the Maus couldn't be an offensive weapon, but it could become the ultimate mobile bunker. There was a doctrine of steel blockers meant to defend key cities. The idea was simple and terrifying. A 190-ton tank rolls onto a strategic intersection or a bridge and becomes a nearly indestructible firing point, something you can't drive around and can't shove out of the way. It was a plan to turn German cities into fortified labyrinths, where entire districts could be locked by these steel gates. That's why, at the military's demand, extra machine gun embrasures appeared along the sides. The vehicle had to be able to bite in every direction inside narrow urban canyons. But fate had other plans. At the end of November, British air raids dropped thousands of tons of explosives on Berlin, reducing Siemens and Alket production facilities to piles of rubble. Now building super tanks wasn't just difficult, there was neither the capacity nor the place to do it. The project that was supposed to become a wonder weapon was reduced to a one-off experiment. Engineers were ordered to finish at least 2 existing prototypes at any cost, simply to prove the concept could work at all. The first, designated 205/1, was by December 1943 little more than a moving box, with a concrete dummy turret in place of the real thing. Testing began to answer the single most important question: would the ground itself hold up under the weight of this colossus? The results of the first test runs at the Kummersdorf Proving Grounds stunned even the skeptics. Despite weighing as much as 3 heavy Tigers, the first prototype, coded 205/1, showed surprisingly obedient handling. Its massive tracks, more than a meter wide, spread the load so effectively that ground pressure turned out to be only slightly higher than that of standard production tanks. The little Maus confidently climbed 45-degree slopes and pushed through mud pits up to half a meter deep, without showing any signs it might bog down. Thanks to the electric transmission, the vehicle could be controlled almost with fingertips, but speed remained its Achilles heel, no more than about 20 kilometers per hour on hard ground. By June 1944, the second prototype, 205/2, was ready. Unlike its predecessor, this one was a fully equipped fighting vehicle, with a real turret installed and a monstrous paired armament setup. The firepower of its 128mm main gun, combined with a 75mm secondary cannon, made the Maus the king of any head-to-head duel. But by then, the front was already closing in on Germany's borders. Ferdinand Porsche and a handful of diehards kept making small refinements in half-empty workshops, but strategically, the project was already dead. The Reich's resources were exhausted, and burning scarce fuel just to test a steel giant had become an unaffordable luxury. The 1945 offensive put a final period on the story. A few days before the start of January, both tanks were moved toward Berlin on SS orders. The second prototype, fully outfitted and combat-capable, was sent to help defend the German General Staff headquarters at Wunsdorf. This was supposed to be the moment of truth. The rolling fortress would finally prove itself by blocking the path of Soviet tank armies. But the epic battle Hitler dreamed of never happened. On the march to its positions, the Maus suffered an engine failure. The giant froze on the roadside, turned into a useless mountain of metal that, with its sheer bulk, ended up blocking the road for Germany's own retreating units. Knowing it couldn't be repaired or towed, the crew planted demolition charges inside the fighting compartment. The first prototype, sitting in a hangar about 60 kilometers from the capital, met the same fate. Without its weapons, it couldn't resist at all, and it was blown up shortly before Red Army forward units reached the area. Two wonder weapons, once burdened with the hopes of an entire empire, ended their journey as twisted heaps of steel, without firing a single shot at the enemy. But at the very moment German crews abandoned the smoking shells of their machines, a new chapter, one full of questions, was beginning for Soviet engineers. On June 29, 1945, an urgent report landed on Stalin's desk. Marshal of Armored Forces Fedorenko wrote that objects had been discovered whose scale defied logic. Soviet specialists arriving at the Wunsdorf blast site saw a scene that was both terrifying and fascinating. The interior of the second prototype had been completely burned out, equipment destroyed, but the armored capsule itself had survived the internal explosion, proving just how unbelievably tough it was. On the first prototype, investigators found evidence of impacts from large-caliber shells. Later it became clear the Germans had tested their own armor, trying to find out whether the Allies had any realistic chance of piercing that steel shell at all. The results were grim. The Maus really did appear essentially impregnable. For the Soviet tank school, this discovery hit like a bucket of ice water. At the time, Leningrad engineers were deep into work on a next-generation heavy tank known as Object 257. They believed it represented the peak of protection, but a direct comparison with the captured German giant revealed a harsh reality. The Soviet machine wouldn't be able to punch through the Maus head-on, while the German 128mm gun could reliably destroy virtually any target it faced. That realization triggered a new, frantic race for firepower and caliber. The military immediately rewrote the requirements. The new Soviet tank had to weigh at least 60 tons, be protected against Maus-grade shells, and carry a 130mm naval-style gun. That's how the ghost of a defeated German monster began setting the rules for Soviet designers. The result of that chase was the famous IS-7, a 70-ton giant with a cast turret so tough that even its own ultra-powerful gun couldn't penetrate it. For 4 years, some of the best minds in the USSR tried to outdo the Maus's shadow, creating machines of staggering complexity and cost. Only in 1949 did the country's top leadership conclude that the road of gigantomania led nowhere. A Council of Ministers decree ended the development of super-heavy tanks and pushed engineers back toward vehicles in the 50-ton range. The Maus never fought a real battle, yet it still managed to throw the Victor's tank development off course for years, becoming the last, strangest echo of a war that had already ended. Today, standing in the silence of the Kubinka Museum, this steel colossus, assembled by Soviet technicians from parts of 2 prototypes, serves as a reminder that, in the history of weapons, once you go beyond common sense, you're stepping into the territory of defeat.